So we're going to talk about destructuring, which is an ES6. Two things that we need to think about when we are thinking about destructuring, and we're only going to be talking about destructuring objects and arrays right now. We'll talk about the other kinds of destructuring later. We have the target, and then we have the source, right? So keep that in mind because I'm going to be using those words, but let me explain what destructuring is. Destructuring is a simplified way of defining variables and taking them outside of an object or an array. So in your code, you may be doing a lot of say var obj equals this thing, you know, like first. Someone tell me their first name.
Dan.
All right. What's a really cool last name?
Coelho.
How do you spell that?
Coelho.
C-O, like
LHO. After the.
Is that Brazilian or something? Yeah, that's cool. That is a cool last name. Awesome. So doing something like this and then saying var first equals obj.first, you can already see that I'm exhausted just typing this out, and then we say var last equals obj.last. Who does this kind of stuff in their code? Probably everyone all the time, you know, unless you're already using destructuring, because that's what destructuring solves, is it saves us from repeating ourselves in this way. So we're going to talk about variable declarations and assignment with destructuring. This is an example for an array. So we have an array here with the value true and false. And we are destructuring it so that first will equal true, and then second will equal false. What's the pattern here? So if I say oops. What's the pattern?
So the array.
Why is first true and why is second false? You're going to say something?
Yeah, it's the array of consts there is multiple objects, and they're all being assigned to those values, the related values in the on the other side.
Yeah, it's just in order, right? The first, and it has nothing to do with the naming here. I just named it first because I thought that would be helpful, but in retrospect, maybe that makes it a little more confusing. We can name it whatever we wanted. And it's just going to be in order, right? So imagine if this array was much longer, you could, you know, do A, B, C, D all the way to Z, and then it would just be assigned in order. So that's array destructuring for variable declaration. Why is it variable declaration? Because we're creating a variable right there. So we're creating the variable first, we're creating the variable second, and we're also using some other ES6 things that we haven't looked at yet, const and let. Are you guys using const and let in your code? Yeah? Raise your hand if you are. Raise your hand if you kind of are, but you sometimes forget, and then you have to go back and select all and replace it. That's me. That's where I'm at. It's just much faster to do it the old way. And then I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to look like I don't care, because I do, so I'm going to go back and fix it. Anyway, that's enough about my life. Let's talk about this. Is this clear how this is working? So we're creating variables on the left. That's the target. And the source is an array with values. It's a little confusing because there's two brackets on each side. We're not used to seeing brackets on each side. We're used to seeing brackets on the right of a assignment versus on both sides.
What if there's not equal on each side? So if there's true, false, true, or something.
Yeah, let's try it. I like where we're going with this. So So, like this?
Yeah.
If you had to guess, what do you think? Hmm?
Syntax error.
Undefined. So it's the same as probably doing something like this and saying equals array at 3, right? Because it's 0, 1, 2. 3 is undefined. Oh.
Does it successfully assign C and D though?
See how it still works? Like the behavior isn't different, and so C and D. So that's nice. JavaScript's flexible like that. Cool. We good? How does this differ from the kind of variable declaration work that we were doing before? No, it's exactly the same. You could say something obvious.
Well, it's less verbose.
Mm-hmm.
It's more succinct, but it can make for really long sort of assignment lines given a large number of variables and maybe decreased readability.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Cool. And then we have the variable declarations, and then we have the assignment. Assignment is just when the variables already exist, you can assign them. So up top, we're creating variables for the first time. Second one, we're assigning them to a variable that already exists. So looks similar, except that we don't have the var let const in front. Yeah? Someone asked me a question about this.
When do you use constant versus let?
I like this question. So you use const when you don't want the variable, that variable name, to be reassigned to something. So const, if you try to reassign it to a different value, there are some caveats here because of what we were talking about with array, with the objects in reference and stuff like that. But essentially, if you try to reassign const, that's why I had to make new variable names each time. So up here, I said const C, for example. So if I say C equals 3, it gives you an error. You can't reassign it, which is nice. It's nice as long as you know that if you say, where are we at? F, if we say const E equals, right? Where are we? Let's just say J. Okay, so we have J, but when we say J.x equals 3, that will work. Curious, right? Why might that this way work and not the other way? How about anyone? How about Cameron? You're the only person whose name I remember for some reason.
What was the other way? I was taking notes when you did the first.
It's okay.
Or,
The question was, how come when we reassign C, we get an error, but when we reassign the value of X, which is a property on an object, it just lets us do it, even though we're using const in both cases? Does anyone have an idea?
I imagine constant doesn't apply to the attributes of the variable.
The const, it's not that const doesn't apply to the properties.
We're not changing J. We're just changing a property on J.
Exactly. So
can you not add a new property onto J?
no,
So
you can still add a new
you
property.
can still do that. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so if we said j.y equals 4. But what we can't do is we can't say J is now a different object.
Can you hold the properties constant?
What was that?
Can you hold the properties constant? So, for instance, J dot Y.
If you use object.freeze.
Oh, you're asking if you want it to, so that you can't change the
Right,
properties.
yeah.
Yeah. So object.freeze would do that for you.
So you'd have to wrap that object with all the properties in object.freeze. And that only goes one layer deep. So if you have objects inside of objects,
How do you handle objects inside of objects?
I
You wanna
use a
freeze it?
little module called deep freeze.
Oh, okay. So it just.
So like
recurses
I
through or
think
something.
Substack wrote it. It's just like a little recursive object.freeze
Okay. Cool.
module.
Yeah. So useful, but just keep that in mind that it seems like it's doing a lot more than it is, and it can be a little bit tricky when we're using objects and arrays and functions, right? Are non-primitive values. Primitive values will work as you expect.
Do you want to demo object.freeze? Because that might be useful.
Sure. I don't actually know what are the arguments?
Just put in an object like your x.
J?
Or yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
So now
then-
just try to redefine.
What? Okay, so it doesn't give you an error, but it doesn't let you change it.
Yeah, it doesn't throw an actual.
Yeah, like the console is actually throwing an error.
It doesn't throw a syntax error.
Yeah, cool. So that's const. Any other questions about this?
So when to use let?
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So let allows you to reassign, and so it's similar to var, right? So var you can reassign, great, but let has implications for its scope. So when we talk about scope later on today, you'll see that before let we didn't have a concept of block scope. Is anyone coming from a language? Someone said they were doing Ruby, right? Yeah, so you probably have run into block scope and you use block scope. It means a block is just curly brackets that isn't an object. That's the way I think about it. So you can have curly brackets that's an object, or you can have curly brackets that's a block, and they can be by a function, right? And you can create a function block. It could be on an if block, try catch block, stuff like that. So prior to let, there was no scope to block scope, which means that, and we'll go into more, that if a
Like an if statement, there would be no scope to the if statement
Yeah.
prior to using
prior to
let.
that, it would just be the function scope, but I haven't explained scope yet. So I'm trying
Gotcha.
to think of,
Maybe move on and revisit that.
yeah, we can move on. Well,
In
no,
the
let's
scope
just
section.
note that it has implications with scope. It behaves differently. Yeah, cool, good question.
So it's basically a difference between global and local variable. Just. So
It's a similar idea. It's not
Okay.
the same, but it's about different. Where a variable reference has access to a value, right? So sometimes curly brackets will define that. Sometimes they don't, and let and var has something to do with that. Has everything to do with that. So cool. Great. Destructuring. And here's for our objects. What's the pattern here? Oh, I can't do that. So, anyone? How about, let's start with you.
Is the key and value, they have the same name?
Yeah, so the property name and the target declarations have the same name. What did I do wrong? Do I have a syntax error? Syntax error. First is a Oh. Okay. So let's check out what first one is undefined. That's not what, oh. Has to match. Giving it all away. What? First one has already been declared. Well, fine. Okay. Whew, we're good. So first one, 0. Second one is 1. So who can tell me how this works? How about,
It's working because of the order, similar to last time, and then the matching names of the objects.
yeah. So the names have to match in this case. So objects don't have an order, but it just happens to be in order in this example. But yeah, awesome. So same thing, we're creating a variable, we're assigning a variable called first to the value of the first property, and we're assigning the value second to the value of the second property. Yeah?
So the order doesn't matter
The order does
in
not
its
matter.
declaration
No.
or assignment?
No. Whenever you start thinking that objects have an order or should have an order, you should be using an array. And if you're expecting an order from an object, sometimes it'll always come that way, but that's a bad expectation because it's not guaranteed. Although sometimes it seems like it comes in order. Cool. So that's destructuring. It just makes getting values out of objects and arrays have less typing. And we like less typing, as long as it's still readable. You know, as long as we can understand what you're doing, awesome. Once you start to get out of that range, then that's when we start to have problems. And that's where some people are very dogmatic about it. Cool. Questions about this?
I don't really follow here. Where are we creating an object and where are we creating properties?
Yeah. So that's the confusing thing, right? Is because the syntax looks really similar. So the way that I think about it is you're always, whenever you create a variable or you assign a variable, it's always going to be on the left, right? You say var x equals y. You don't say y equals x var or something backwards like that. So just remember that. And yeah, and then the right-hand side is going to be the value, just like in that example. And it also helps that for the variable declarations, it says const let var, whichever one you're using in that case. And that gives you a hint. Yeah, a lot of times it's not even going to be a literal like this. It's just going to be like my obj equals this, and then, come on. It's going to be maybe not. Can someone spot my syntax error?
Do you need a var or let before the object?
I don't think so. I can try. No. Weird. Okay. Well, typically, you're not looking at an object literal, but you're looking at a reference of a
If it's already been declared, is that const freaking out?
I don't know. Okay. Well, I'll figure this out and get back to you. Dun dun dun. It's a mystery. That's why I like mysteries, because when I don't know something, then it's just a mystery. It's not that I don't know it. Awesome.